I'm John Connors here with Blockchain and AI for Ecology. Really excited to be here with Rodger Savory and Neil Smith, talking about Grow Blockchain and its impact for farmers and grazers. So just going to quickly, 30-second introductions, everybody. We're going to start with Rodger. Rodger, tell us about your pedigree.
Rodger Savory, born in Africa, grew up in New Mexico, Army in Alaska, lived and worked in 66 countries around the world. Always owned ranches, always managed cattle and other livestock. Have been involved with holistic management basically since birth, learned it through osmosis. And yeah, just pushing the envelope of knowledge. And as I like to say, I'm the pointy end of the spear, trying to figure out new ways of regenerating our planet.
Love that, Rodger, and you're doing great work. And thank you for joining us today. Neil, give us a little bit of your background and an understanding of what is Grow Blockchain, and tell the world what we want to hear, because not everybody knows the really amazing stuff you and your team are up to.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks to be here and pleasure to see both of you electronically on this Friday as we're taping this. My background is in agriculture. I grew up on a horticulture and livestock operation. I've been very integrated in broadacre row cropping, livestock operations my whole life. Always at the intersection of technology and agriculture, and like Rodger, kind of trying to push the boundaries, and considered myself a black sheep in the herd on a regular basis, which I wear with pride as a badge. That's led me to the journey where I crossed paths with one of the co-founders of the Grow blockchain, and how we can really harness the power of the blockchain to bring more opportunities to the agriculture sector and flip the script in the food supply chain. So at the very premise, the blockchain does a few things amazingly well. It stores data in a tamper-proof state. It analyzes data with AI very effectively, better than Web 2 and AI, Web 3 and AI, which is what blockchain is built in, Web 3 technology. Works extremely well. And then we can monetize that data on the blockchain in ways that haven't been done before, more streamlined and more effective. The other thing the blockchain allows as well is a way to decentralize economies and the introduction of a decentralized finance. And so what we're pushing is that it's 1 + 1 = 3, really is a way to create resiliency. Some of the things we do on our blockchain for simplicity's sake, and I know we'll dive into it, but we can take traceability information. So we can trace everything from genetics and tube through to steak on a plate, through the whole supply chain, really understanding, how that, in this case, livestock or beef was grown and raised and where it came from and source of origin. We can do that with crops as well. We can do that with anything that is edible coming out of the ground, whether from a CEA facility or arable land. We have an ability to create environmental credits very effectively, created our own sandbox, streamlining the process, removing about 95% of the intermediaries that don't need to be there, and ensuring that there is, at time of issuance, trust and transparency in the rigor of the data. And we can also figure out how to put that data in a credit using a tool called an NFT, so it can sit on somebody's balance sheet and be used against it before burning it against environmental reporting. We continue to be advisors and consultants, using the chain effectively to capture information, and then a commerce site so that we can create new market spaces using DeFi. So that's us in a nutshell.
I was just raising my hand because I wanted to turn to Rodger and say, since this is farmer-focused content, and Neil, your Porsche engine better than anybody else. Rodger, ask questions as far as what is any of that did not land for you. What does it mean? How is it applicable to a grazer and a farmer and a producer? And please don't be shy.
Okay, I'm not going to be shy. What the hell did Neil just say? I mean,
Wonderful.
I didn't hear the word cow shit once. It's so from a farmer's point of view. Basically, everything about this is gobbledygook, and we kind of know that there's something out there, but it's just like when people start to manage holistically. I have to convince people that the way they've always done things no longer applies and you've got to look at something else. Well, that's very difficult to do. So when I started speaking with Neil, I basically said what I've just recently said now, as in, I cannot ask people to try something new if I'm not willing to try it as well. So
Yes.
so I had to kind of practice what I preach. So from that point of view, that's part of the reason that we're doing this, John, and thank you for organizing it, is because I am every farmer and rancher.
Hmm.
So
Absolutely.
if we explain it to me so that I actually understand it, then we might have a hope of getting the message out. So
So
yeah,
the
so let's start right at the beginning and explain it in kindergarten blocks.
Yeah, I think everyone always asks, dumb it down, and I always like to say I want to level you up versus dumb it down, and that maybe goes along the lines of not convincing, but certainly bringing a new way of looking at how we use data coming off the farm more effectively, and that's really what we do. And so when we think about a ranching operation, we think about a cropping operation, a farming operation, capital F. There's a one consistency that it happens pretty much readily across the whole gamut, which is most things today are driven by some sort of data or data-driven decision making tools. However, that data has unfortunately had an adverse effect on farmers and ranchers. It's being used against them. It's being held in a guillotine to their operations, meaning that banks or governmental or regulation organizations are debanking or trying to force the operations to downsize or even file Chapter 11, unfortunately. And so if we were able to give power back to farmers and ranchers by creating some sort of sovereignty over their own data that they're originating, that they're collecting or cultivating, as it were, this is where blockchain starts. And it could be where blockchain stops. I mean, you could just collect the data to store it, but it's yours and you can decide what to do with it. But that really is at the very core level what the blockchain can do to help the farmers and ranchers. Does that make some sense, Rodger?
Let's break that down. So, for example, I know that a feed company that sells a supplement, I
Yes.
know that they look at the price we sell a steer for and they calculate based on the amount they know that we're going to get for our steer, they want to make 7% of that money. Now, they've done that based on, oh, well, we know he sells it for that, therefore we want 7%. So they value 7% of the sale. Let's say the steer sells for $1,000. So they value it at 7% of $1,000. And that is what they price their product to sell for. But they're naive when they come up with that figure because they don't realize that steers don't just miraculously appear out of thin air. But the people in the cities doing this calculation, that's what they use because they thought, well, that's a fair figure. But they don't realize that that steer.
Can I interject for a moment?
Yeah,
Can I interject?
go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But so the framing I'd like to start for the farmer and the producer. Not about the blockchain conceptually, not what does Grow blockchain, the Nourish Mart offer producers day one for free? What could Neil, could you answer this question? If a farmer producer in Asheville, for instance, wanted to sell their products to an audience that has crypto, that wants to stay in crypto native transacting world, do they have the opportunity to do that? Can we start at that story?
We
Everything the
can.
Porsche engine
So
does that make
so I'm going to
sense?
back that up a little bit, John, and sort of pull on the thread that Rodger was going down, because I think it's very important to understand what Rodger was saying, because this is actually a common discussion that happens on a regular basis, that our current farm economics, our commercial models, are often driven by people that don't really understand what's happening at the field level. So all the costs that go into rearing a cow. They're driven by market demand, they're driven by consumers, they're driven by a bunch of outside factors. All of that has been hedged on some sort of data that they're analyzing, and they're coming up with these conclusions with. That data has originally come from farmers. Now, if you ask a farmer or rancher, hey, can you share your data? They're going to be less than reluctant or less than energetic to share that data with you, because they're very skeptical of how that data is going to be translated, not sharing the full context, et cetera, and so forth. So that is a very good, and we'll come back to that in a second, Rodger, because I think we can dive into that. To answer your question, John, there are very simple applications within what we have built that allow for new market opportunities for ranchers. Let's use just one thread of agriculture here for ranchers to sell direct to consumer. Their uncontracted meat, or potentially it's their primary market, but it could be secondary or tertiary, using a decentralized finance mechanism. So we know today that there's a ton of people out there that have or hold decentralized finance. We call that crypto for a large part of it, but I like the term decentralized finance because I think crypto is connected with all the things we see in the news, which doesn't paint the full picture. There is a benefit to that. So anyway, these people that hold decentralized finance, they don't want to be traders by and large, but they want to do something. Well, we can connect them with ranchers on our platform, and they can purchase nutritious meat to nourish their family. It's free for the rancher. There's no middleman fee, and there's 100% profit that goes back to the rancher. The consumer knows who that rancher is because it's a direct from farm purchase. So that's one tool and one application that is available today, and it's an easy on-ramp for a lot of farmers and ranchers to get familiar with this whole Web3 blockchain and decentralized finance. But the bigger picture is really what Rodger was talking about, which is how do we create a new economic model, understanding what the constraint points are with our current model, and then interjecting all the powerful tools that we have within the blockchain to help facilitate this new decentralized market space.
Okay.
Well said. Thank you for framing that. Now, Rodger, continue to dive in at that level of PhD that I didn't think everybody who was tuning in was there yet. But great framing, Neil. Thank you.
Well, you know, I am in the cow shit business, and you know that PhD stands for piled high and deep, right?
I do. I would never say that out loud to you, but yeah.
So we stay away from that. But yeah, so in a nutshell, we're saying that, okay, the key words that I got from this as a farmer or rancher was decentralizing power and removing it from the monopolies. Now, for us who have been destroyed by Monsanto, who've been destroyed by the big three or the big four meat packers, Cargill, who are those
JBS.
Brazilian boys,
Tyson.
JBS, etc., etc. You know, for us, that's a massive step. But you know, I'm thinking of those chaps who've just put together $300 million to build their own plant. What they don't actually understand is they're actually going to be bankrupt within a decade. And they're going to be bankrupt because we've watched what the big packers do. They will drop their meat prices below cost of production for just long enough to bankrupt that business. Then they will buy that whole lovely $300 million plant back from the ranchers, and they'll pay $20 million to the bankruptcy court. They will get a $300 million thing. They will immediately recoup their $300 million of loss that they had while they sold meat for below cost of production, and then they will double the cost of meat going forward and reap any even greater rewards. We know this because we've been watching it for the last 70 years. So with that in mind, how can this decentralized break the power of these, we call them monopolies, but I mean 4 might as well be a monopoly.
Yeah. Look, there's use cases like this and stories, unfortunately, throughout the whole supply chain of agriculture. We're talking about beef in this case. It could be, you pick a produce, you pick a commodity, and you're going to
Soy,
find
corn,
similar
it's happened
stories.
to everyone.
Yeah.
Wheat, corn, soy, it's happened to everyone. Yeah.
What I like to do is really say, let's not lament on the broken system and try to fix the broken system. Let's just create a new sandbox. And I'm a big fan of saying that. And that's really what decentralization means. The mechanism to decentralize, meaning giving power back to the farmers and the ranchers, needs to come with the one thing that others don't control. And that would be the decentralized finance mechanism. So, well, two things, I should say: data and the decentralized finance mechanism. If those two things can be actually owned by farmers and ranchers, which they can through a blockchain, we've just happened to build that within our Grow blockchain. We are starting to empower. So inherently, the Grow token in this case is the decentralized finance. When we use it, it isn't controlled by central banks. So we don't have big ag, you name the big ag institution, can't go into the bank and, lobby or manipulate to not extend LOCs or, not create those lending mechanisms so the farms can stay in operation. The farmers and ranchers actually own their own dollars, and they can leverage against that through an appreciating liquidity of utilization, because they own the one thing that everyone really wants, which is the data, which is going to underpin everything that's happening in that economic world that is completely broken. And so with those two mechanisms, we start to create this new sandbox. We can create microloans, we can create non-restrictive funding, we can create numerous different fractionalized ownership programs, call it herd share, because we're dealing with cattle right now in this conversation, whereby consumers and the farmers and ranchers can work more collectively, thus squeezing the supply chain into either conforming or continuing to stand in their swim lane and stamp their feet. And so we call that flipping the script in the supply chain, because now we're giving the power, which has not been in the farmers and ranchers court, back to the farmers and ranchers to have different conversations with that supply chain. When farmers and ranchers are in need of feed for their cattle, fencing, infrastructure, water, stock trailers, you name it, and they're not given that opportunity through their financial institutions because of big ag going in and manipulating, controlling, or otherwise dictating what's going to happen, so they can do exactly what you said: undercut them, buy them, reinvent the wheel and earn their money back, but at the peril of the farmer and rancher. If we give that if we strip that power away and actually give the power of financial mechanism back to that rancher with decentralized finance, we start to create a lot of micro economies or micro industries in all the different bioregions, the decentralization of a centralized component. We also create new supply chain routes, so things don't have to go through the typical channel. Instead of everyone going to one pack house, we can have multiple independent pack houses, because we actually have the community funded or micro loan capabilities to set up these smaller components. Now, regulatory parties are going to come in, and so there's always going to be a conversation of how do we regulate that and the taxation, but we can limit the tax events by only taking out of DeFi and putting into fiat. In this case, we'll use Canadian or US dollars, because that's where both of us are based right now, to deal with those tax initiatives, so that those regulatory parties, which are really after their tax, their piece of the pie on taxation, are satisfied, knowing that the compliance for safety and quality is going to be still held with farmer and rancher. And so we've got that mechanism today. What it takes are individuals getting on board with the utilization of this new financial trade mechanism called the decentralized finance, and not wanting ownership of that data. So I was talking to a software company that was a different one I want to talk to you about, Rodger, doing virtual fencing. And I said to them, you're collecting all this data off the farmers, where the cows are, where, who owns that data? And well, we do. I said, to what end? What can you do with that data? We'll never let it leave our servers, right? But you have a centralized server that is at peril because it's in a Web 2 world on a data center somewhere for somebody to either hack in, distribute that, or potentially you're going to get a sweet enough deal from somebody in the big egg that you won't turn down, and that data will miraculously walk over to their purview. What if you actually gave that ownership of the data back to the farmer who is gathering the data for you, and they just licensed it to you to use in your platform? Now you could do that for a very low cost of 1 cent, or you could actually have the farmer license that back for an offset of the quantification. Your platform is great at computating that data in a way that is visible and translatable and usable on their platform. How would that sound? Well, that doesn't fit our economic model, right? Your economic model based on today's current economic setup. So our structure of economy, of trade and sale. But in the new world, and this is where we're going to an ownership economy with blockchain and DeFi. You're going to need to start thinking in these premises. So how do you collect data without owning it? Pretty straightforward. You use a mechanism like a blockchain because it's tamper-proof data that actually can be tied to somebody that owns it, the data originator. In this case, we'll call it Rancher for simplicity's sake. That's how we start flipping conversations, and that's how we start changing the mindset so that we empower ranchers more effectively.
Okay, so that
Can we
leads
hear
into my
from
next
Rodger right now?
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that leads into my next question. So a lot of ranchers have what I call analysis paralysis from too much data.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've got all these data points. Our cows, let's carry on with the virtual fence example. Our cows walked here, they were there for 10 minutes. I know exactly what those cows are doing. I don't need the data. But now with everyone chasing data, what is the relevance of that data? Because it can now overwhelm people.
Oh, absolutely. So I always take this from two perspectives. There's going to be generationally driven. There's going to be those that are of a certain generation class, and we don't have to point fingers at
Don't get
anyone.
rude.
Yeah, I'm not being rude. Yeah. That are very much reared themselves in being more observationally driven in how we can operate our ranches. I grew up like that. You certainly are leading the cause, the champion cause for that. On the other side, we've got the younger generation that are very technology driven and need the data to drive some of the decision making, and that's really a self assurance that they're going to be doing the right things. On both ends of the spectrum, data can get overwhelming. It's a reality. We can't get away from it. What we can say is that we still need that virtual fence company to take that data and present it back to us in a way that's simplified. But those SaaS companies today don't have to own where the data comes from, the data origination. So from the cows, they need to find different ways to say, Rodger, that's your data, it's your cows. I just get to use it and present it back to you in a way that is not overwhelming, that is going to make sense and is going to be useful for you. And so whether that's on your phone, so you can move the virtual fencings from your office and not have to go out into the field, whatever those usability cases are for the data computation is where those companies are going to start to really prosper. But they have to get out of the mindset that they own the platform and they own the data. The data should be owned with the person who owns the land, in this case, rancher. And that's a reality. We will get better and better because the younger generation is far better at understanding what data points are needed and how to use data in ways that we haven't even thought about. We're just setting the railway up so that they can get there and really start to play with data in ways that is going to create efficiency and resiliency in the balance sheet. Those are the two areas I like to focus on.
Okay, so that's led into my next question. We've got a new in the news example with 23andMe about to sell my genetic data, which I'm meant to have been able to cancel and delete, but it's not deletable, and etc. etc. So now for pedigree beef breeders, sheep breeders, goat breeders, those pedigrees and bloodlines and DNA, they are literally worth millions of dollars.
Yeah. Champion bulls,
Millions.
same thing. Yeah.
Exactly. I did a study with one client where we were able to prove that a pedigree bloodline of a particular breed, they had cheated back in the 70s and brought in another breed, and hybridized it and crossed it, and that's how they got the double muscling in, etc., which in effect meant that that breed was no longer that breed. Yeah, but we were able to pinpoint it all the way back to the exact person and the year 1976 that they did it. Now, in 1976, they had no way of knowing that 30, 40, 50 years later, DNA would show who the cheat was and when he did it. And this is extremely important to a lot of livestock people, and 23andMe is an example of people were promised, you own your data, we'll never sell it, etc. What makes 23andMe different to Grow Chain?
23andMe has a centralized entity that makes decisions based on what they want to do for their business. In this case, they own the data. They get either persuaded to move that data somewhere else, sell it. They control it. That's the issue with centralized entities. When we think about Grow, it is a decentralized community right now, meaning that I don't own the blockchain. Anyone else that's part of the blockchain doesn't own it. Everyone that has data that they put in there is their data based on their, call it code, or their portal, their door to open up, and they get to choose what they do with that data. And so we don't have a centralized server. We don't have.
What you're saying is my password is only valid for me, and
correct.
Throughout history, no one can ever get access to my data.
I'm not going to say never ever, because who knows what the world can conjure, and what people's brains can do, and call on hackers but what I can say is that yes, it's your password, no one else owns it, to the point that if you lose your password and you ask us to reset it, we can't. That's called self-custodial ownership, which means you're solely responsible for your portal, your key, your wallet, and everything that's included in it, to the point where, and I had this happen with a self-custodial wallet where I actually lost the secret password, and I was like, hey, is there any way I can get out? No, sorry, there's no back door, there's nothing I can do. They can't get in, and so that account's just sitting dormant and no one can access it. That's the beauty of blockchain.
But that's
it's also the scary part.
That's the financial side.
I guess for the data as well. It's the same idea.
So it's the data and the financial side. Okay.
Correct.
So there's the clear separation between this and all the other forms of data.
Correct.
Yeah, I just wanted that to be clear for other farmers and ranchers.
Yes. Okay. And we can go, Rodger, to the extent of you have data and you want to share it with John. John can see the data points that you choose to share with him. And if he wants to take those data points and try to sell them, we have this little tool called proof of identity. He's got to prove and get your blessing to do something with that data. And if he tries to do that without your permission, and I'm just simplifying the terminology, it, in short, redacts everything and pings you to say, hey, Rodger, John's trying to do something with your data that you didn't give permission to. What do you want to do? And so that tool called proof of identity is how we create another level of peace of mind for the data owner in terms of sharing that data. Now, the one thing I will say, though I see this being a rarity, but rarities happen sometimes, is that if somebody really wants to sit there and record everything on paper, I mean, there's a point now where we can actually lock people from taking screenshots off their laptop like they used to. I'll screenshot this video call right now. You can actually block that today. Now, if I used another device and screenshot it, sure enough, we know humans, when they have a bug up their rear end and they really want to be manipulative and do something that is nefarious, they might find a way. However, using the tool within the digitized world Everything I've just said is very true and real. You own it. There's lockdown. There's proof of identity. The external components to that, we're going to have to believe in humanity versus the nefarious nature of what people do.
Okay, so now
Can I jump in for a
next
minute here? Just for a little bit of context, and there might be a lag on my end, Roger. So I'm sorry about that. So Neil, can you bring this back in with Roger's assistance as well? We're talking about what blockchain can do. I'm not clear, besides Nourish Mart at the beginning from this conversation, on what Grow specifically does, what the decentralized apps and Grow's ecosystem do, what node ownership would do for a farmer, and could you tie in that part of the story?
You said centralized apps. They're actually decentralized apps, DApps.
I said decentralized apps.
Did you?
There must have been an issue with the audio.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
did.
apologize. So just for clarity there. So the applications, in short, that are built on the blockchain were a proof of use case on what we could do. So the big talk in town right now is traceability. Where does my meat come from? Where does my cucumber come from? Where does my flour come from? We can help the farmer create a traceability program or a data set that can either be a rider with that product to the purchaser or the buyer, call it a CPG, and or a QR code that sits on the bag so a consumer can scan it and understand where that product and how it was grown or raised. That's something we can do with the data. That's either you can pay for that or you can use your earned Grow tokens to purchase that program or service and utilize that application.
as a farmer, you can purchase it, or as the consumer, or both?
As a farmer. Yeah. I guess it could be anyone, but really it wouldn't make any sense for a consumer to purchase it if they didn't have anything to trace. So in theory, you need to be growing or raising.
Can the consumer purchase it to trace in reverse?
Oh, no, you need to start at source of origin.
Okay.
So yeah, seed in ground or genetic in vial through insemination.
Okay.
The other ways we can use data is environmental credits, which is the other big talk in the town. How do we continue to incentivize the drive towards net zero? And so companies, I think there's a big misconception that companies doing bad can continue to do bad by purchasing carbon credits. That's not the case. They have to be part of an emission reduction process or plan already. And it's really the delta, the difference. So I use aviation as a big example. For them to get to a net zero is very, very hard, but they can certainly reduce their emission factors and reduce their GHG, their footprint in the world. And then the delta between net zero and what they can do, they purchase carbon credits, offsets, in a way to stimulate the one industry that can actually make up the difference, which is agriculture or land stewards, but let's call it agriculture for simplicity's sake. So those land stewards or agriculturalists, farmers and ranchers can get involved in carbon programs that are either drawing carbon down and holding it, sequestering it in the soil, or they're improving biodiversity, so they're improving the ecological outcomes, or they're improving watershed, or they're reducing the methane gases coming out of the cattle, or emission reductions from lack of nitrogen applications. All of that can be bundled into what we call credits that industry can buy. On the other side is called an inset credit, and that really is a rider with the product that adds a duality value to products, typically going into the CPGs or distribution joints. That's another way that we can use data and create financial mechanism out of that data. Now, the data owner doesn't have to lose ownership of that data, but can still facilitate that transaction. The blockchain works in a benefit both ways. One, both buyer and seller can trust that the data is what the data says it is, and it hasn't been manipulated because it's held in an immutable state on the blockchain.
So let's dig into that a bit more, because we've had since the Chicago Chicago Carbon Exchange, we've had carbon markets come and go faster than anything, and they've all failed for the exact same mathematical reason. It's a a fixed expense with a variable income. Now, and so the fixed expense is the cost of testing, etc., etc. You borrow the money. You've got 100,000 acres. It's $20 per acre to test. You borrow that money. You carry the interest for 5 years. You're promised that it's going to sell for $30 a ton. 5 years later, you've carried the money and the interest and everything, all at the farmer's expense. The price drops down to 8 cents a ton. Farmer loses his shirt, farm goes bankrupt. Now, finally, after
Yes.
35 years, I understand that some carbon exchanges have finally got that message, and they're finally offering upfront money, as they should have been all along. Okay, if you agree to make these changes, we'll give you this money up front to change how you do your grazing or your water or what you plant in your fields. So we're finally, I understand, getting to that point. Now, with the skepticism that farmers and ranchers have built over 35 years of failed schemes, explain to us why we should try this for carbon farming when all the other schemes have failed. Separate it out so that we all get excited.
I will be the first to say, having worked in the carbon space, that the current way that it is being done is laborious, bureaucratical, and extractive to the farmers. And I actually, if asked today, and I was just at a carbon conference in Chicago over the last few days, I got back yesterday, said exactly that. It's a broken system that is full of inconsistencies and really isn't very effective. However, we can create a whole new way of operating. So the self-proclaimed leaders, let's call it thought leaders or groups in that market space, have caused a lot of confusion, have caused a lot of angst, have created a lot of unrealized promises, and it just needs to be changed. And I think by and large, both the supply chain and the farmers recognize that the actual carbon market space scheme isn't effective. Now, we can all agree, supply chain and farmers, that the stuff up here we put in the ground creates better ecological outcomes. What I'm claiming with the Grow blockchain is, if you want to get involved in trying to monetize your data, utilizing these credit mechanisms, we can streamline that process for you because we equalize the playing field between buyer and seller. The big thing we don't do is we don't go to registries. We don't go to marketplaces. We don't go to these open source platforms where we say, hey, we got a bunch of credits. I hope somebody buys them. What we do is we initiate a project with the buyer and co-develop it. And so this is where, to your point, Rodger, the buyer is going to get engaged and say, hey, we've got some capital to deploy. We can help, seed fund the beginning of these, incurred costs, working towards an agreed upon price in the back end. They can hold the farmer accountable because of being transparent and visible of the data that's going in there to ensure that agreed price can actually be realized. If there's any changes or bumps, they can talk about it. But we need to facilitate the conversation and negotiate between the buyer and seller and remove the intermediaries that don't need to be there. Large case, the registry. We can do that with actual quantified, measurable, equations that we fit in that can actually quantify, by and large, what we're pulling out of the air and putting in the ground, or how we're improving watersheds. But it should only be, and I say this loud, and I say this very, very articulately, if I can say the word properly, farmers should not rely on carbon credits to make up the difference in their net losses on farm. And that's what they've been sold to date. Oh, you can change your economic standpoint by getting involved. It should be a cherry on top. It should be because you're doing the right thing, and it's just one of the mechanisms to use data. And I actually posit that you can do a traceability program, use that same data for environmental credits. You can create riders that go along. You can be involved in ESG, Scope 3. You can sell data in terms of open sourcing it to your local co-op, so all of the local farmers can understand the good, bad, and ugly that data can have multiple monetized uses, not just a one case use, meaning that they're not solely reliant on that carbon market or environmental credit market space.
Okay,
Does
so
make
that
sense?
sounds wonderful to you because you understand the stuff. But remember, I'm Joe, the farmer who doesn't understand all the stuff that you just spoke about. Do
Yeah.
you, as part of the service of buying grow chain, grow tokens, is part of the service making the farmer and rancher aware of additional ways to leverage
Yes.
their own personal data?
So as farmers and ranchers become part of our ecosystem, as we call it, or part of the community, they purchase what we call a node, and I can get into that in a second. But it's just a piece of software that is their portal where their data gets stored. You open the vault, you put the data in there. That's really what the node is. It allows them to get access to the knowledge base, the support, the education, and put any one of these programs together, just to keep the terminology simple, that can help them do one of three things: store the data better, analyze the data better, or monetize the data better. And when we're talking about in-field work, whether that's soil sampling, understanding how to integrate forestry into your operations, improve your rearing life cycle. So, taking it from 28 months down to 18 months potentially, as an example. These are the things that we can bring in specialists and are part of our ecosystem. You're going to get that knowledge base as part of joining our community. So you're not going to be left out in the wind, floating around like, what do I need to do? How do I do it? We give you that support just by owning and being part of this community. And it really is true ownership. The data piece is just what we're collecting, and then you can do one of three things with it, as I continue to mention.
Okay, so
And
yeah.
So, I was going to
So
say, I always take the premise, Rodger, of when we are trying to help farmers and ranchers, we start with understanding their financial position. We're not pushing square pegs in round holes, so I'm not asking you to invest or leverage yourself. So I need to understand where your elasticity is, and we need to find mechanisms so that we can improve that first. Then we get into land value, then we get into animal welfare and plant nutrient density, in that order.
okay. Now, in describing things to me, you've used a lot of nice, simple words that I appreciated. But once someone is bought in and they're part of the system, do they have to learn a whole new language? Or do the nice, simple farmers' words continue to be used?
We can use the nice, simple words. Here's what I say when I talked about lifting everyone up. We're going to continue to educate you so you start using the words that are applicable. And I will say that somebody coming from outside of ranching starts to get into ranching, and they're going to learn a whole new vocabulary just to deal with the ranching world, right? Insemination, like, oh, what does that mean? Animal stock units, what does that mean? I mean, the list goes on, right? And so within every industry, within every microcosm, there is terminology that people need to start to learn. And so I'm not going to say that we can continue to find new terminology, but we can certainly keep it as simple as possible and then start to lift you up as you get more familiar with the actual terms that are aligned with this digital infrastructure.
So
Speaking of which, this really, so sorry, Rodger, the lag there. Speaking of which, can you tell a little bit? We have 9 minutes left. Can you tell a little bit about node ownership and how it's like printing money for inputs for farmers in particular? Speaking farmers' language, but giving the Web3 decentralized finance grow blockchain value proposition.
Yeah. So Node is really a piece of software that is the backbone of a blockchain. It creates the consensus. So blocks and chains are the data and the moving around and the things that are happening. For it to actually work or move from point A to point B, whether that's data analysis or data monetization, the nodes all have to create a consensus, and it happens really fast, a nanosecond. We use nano in agriculture quite a bit, nanotubes, nanoparticles. What we think about nano is something that happens in less than 2 seconds. So the nodes work very fast to create consensus. You can actually own a node. It's a piece of software, very low power consumption. You can run it on your laptop, and that gives you an ability to do a few different things. One, put your data into the blockchain, into your vault. Two, in running that node, we're going to reward you via the mining of the Grow token. So every node mines. That's how we create the decentralized finance. We bring it into fruition, just like the reserve prints money. We just call it mining, but you call it printing. Grow tokens, and for the ability to do that, we actually give you 1,400 Grow tokens a day, just for running your node. So you can store your data, and you get 1,400 Grow tokens a day. As the Grow token price appreciates, those tokens are going to be worth more and more. But today, whatever the value is, you can use them. You can use them to go and buy agriculture, call it nature-based solution inputs, infrastructure, anything that we have within our commerce platform. That helps with that balance sheet resiliency, meaning that it's not cash out of pocket, it's not USD out of pocket or Canadian dollars out of pocket. You're using the Grow tokens that your node is printing or mining, and you're applying that for some of your infrastructure costs or operational costs.
With the limited time left, let me just think about it as a farmer or rancher. A node is the spot on a plant where new leaves start to grow. And then the internode is the space in between. So what you're saying is the node then grows, and that's what you're calling mine, as the new leaves grow from the node. In the farmer's language, it's a node turns into new leaves. In your language, it's the node through mining turns into more nodes or internodes?
More internodes, more Grow tokens.
Okay,
Yes.
so an internode is a Grow token.
Yes. It's a great analogy. I love it. Yeah.
So I love that too. So for next time, and I would love to do this monthly if possible, is there a way, Neil, you mentioned to me, Neil, that you might be willing to offer a node to Rodger? Could we get Rodger on a node sooner rather than later? So he sees it, he uses it, and then comes back next month with a new set of questions?
Yes. So in short, Rodger's earned his node. So it's not just pulling it out of thin air and giving it. So he's supported some work, and we are compensating him with a node, and that's one way to potentially earn opportunities within the Grow blockchain. And so directly after this conversation, we have some dialogue around that, and this time next month, we might have to be plus or minus a few days. But yes, we can have that conversation, and Rodger can share his feedback. Love to do that.
So there'll be lots. I'm as confused as can be. So it'll be an exciting next conversation.
Good. Yeah.
So to wrap it up, I mean, Rodger, is there anything left on your plate that we could dive into for 4 minutes about specifically Grow blockchain, Grow tokens, or nodes? Not about the blockchain conceptually. Is there anything you could get some clarity on in this last few minutes while we're together?
I think farmers and ranchers will just want to know, because a cow or a wheat plant on our field is something physical and intrinsic. A US dollar note is something physical and intrinsic. An ounce of gold is physical and intrinsic. And now we're doing a leap of faith into Grow tokens. How does this non-intrinsic thing convert back to paying salaries, buying supplements for our livestock, buying fertilizer? If you could just give us a quick overview of how something virtual turns back into something intrinsic.
Yeah, I'd say today, in today's society, paying for braces on for your daughter, buying feed, fencing, by and large, is all happening digitally anyway. It's less and less that there's actually an intrinsic dollar, paper dollar or coins that are being used. And so the leap of faith isn't so much a leap of faith, it's just using a different digital way to create that trade. And that's all it is. So I think the adoption of Interact cards and credit cards have really helped us in introducing decentralized finance. It's just a different platform. That's it. And it can be done. And so I give the example. I get paid in Grow tokens. That's how I subscribe things on. It's all transparent. You can see what I'm getting paid and track it. I convert only what I need into Canadian dollars to pay my Canadian bills. I leave the rest in decentralized finance because it's not controlled by the government in some centralized bank system that can actually unbank me or take that privilege away. And if we really want to do our own research, which I encourage everyone to do, you don't have to look far to understand the issues with intrinsic dollars, call it fiat, base nation currencies, and all the problems that has, where it's not as problematic and more control within DeFi, but it's not one or the other. It's 1 + 1 = 3. So I think the adoption is quite easy because it's already there happening in our digital world anyway. And all we use is an exchange. So just like me, working in the US and taking my Canadian dollars and moving them to US dollars, I put that through a Forex exchange. It's a foreign exchange, right? I'm taking my Grow tokens and I'm putting it through an exchange and I get Canadian dollars. And that's the mechanism. That's the mechanism that's happening today globally. You've lived in 66 countries, Rodger. You know the details of moving money around internationally. And the benefit of doing it with DeFi is that we're not going through any centralized systems where there's multiple due diligence checkpoints and waiting around and laborious headaches, with EFTs and wire transfers not having the right numbers. You move from one to the other with your wallet codes, and it happens almost instantaneously. And so the pace and efficiency of moving from DeFi to fiat or fiat back to DeFi is expedited, and it's wonderful. And it's all visible. You can see what's actually happening there. So no longer are you calling your bank and going, I didn't get my wire, where is it? And they're going, great, we'll get back to you. We'll charge you $30 for that too. And we'll go figure out, where your wire went wrong. You can actually go explore that yourself.
I look forward to having that conversation in a month's time when I played with it a bit.
Thanks, John. Appreciate you putting this
both.
together.
Thank you both very much for your time. Yeah, this is really, really informative stuff. I'll have the finished copy up shortly for us all to share. And thanks for the patience of unpacking the potential as well as the actual results orientation. This is a fun engagement.
Amazing.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Take care, both of you. Bye.
And now I call you again, right, Neil?
Yeah, why don't we jump on that other link there, because this is John's link here. And
Take care, both of you. See you later.